upon further review, upon further review, upon further review, upon further review.
Okay. Well, first of all, how about those elections yesterday? If you're Penn State, you know what I mean? That was, thank you. And those that voted, thank you very much. I do want to thank a couple people. Where's Dennis? Where's Dennis? Dennis around here? Come on. Where's Dennis? Dennis, stand up. Thank you very much. Dennis, help arrange all this. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. And where's Mary Lou? Is Mary Lou here? Okay, there's Mary Lou. Mary Lou, help arrange all this also. Mary Lou, thank you very much. This is beautiful. Great to be here. This is Lehigh Valley, right? How do you call it? Hey, it's close. It's close enough to Happy Valley. You know what I mean? Yeah. But thank you for coming and to see and hear our program upon further review. This will be the most informative 2.5 hours on the Sandusky case that you will see. You will see that the first thing you need to do, and the first thing that we need to do, is to protect our children. And with our children, I know it's hard to believe, with our children still not being protected enough, and that they still have the chance of being victimized, we need to find the truth in who failed our kids. That's what we need to do. Truth in who failed our kids. Unfortunately, as we know, the victims weren't the center of the stage when this started. They were just completely forgotten about. And I'm talking about, they were forgotten about with our Board of Trustees, with the press, with the Freeh Report, everybody forgot about the victims. So we will take you through different scenarios in detail, and that will hopefully start to frame the real picture. That's what we want to do here, frame the real picture. We will take you back through the last 18 months. So in the last 18 months, we've gotten a lot done, but we are not done. And we will leave no rock unturned. To be informed enables all of us to have informed discussions. So hopefully our program will inspire new thinking and open new discussion. Thank you.
Oh, Papa, sit down and hear my song. Oh, and if you feel like it, then please sing along. No, nothing that I want to say I haven't said before, but to use your words, you can never be too sure. See, even though I don't always show, I'm glad that you're around. Said I'm glad you're around. Oh, son, it's so strange to be around. See that someone so different is a soul like me. You may have gone right, well, I would have gone left, but son, that's all right. I will always have your back. See, even though
Penn State, baby. You didn't know that was coming, did you? So, was there a cover-up and conspiracy? So you had the 1998 investigation, and you had the 2009 investigation. And guess who was stuck in the middle? Penn State. And Penn State took the blame for all of it, from 1998 to 2011. Penn State and Joe took the blame for all of that. Well, our presenter, Eileen Morgan, she will leave no stone unturned. Eileen is a 1990 graduate of Penn State University with a degree in aerospace engineering. I tell people that's what I graduated in. They don't believe me. She does analytical research, and she writes technical reports. So, is Miss Eileen Morgan here? Here she is, Miss Eileen Morgan. Oh, and also, I wanted to say, she did pass out, but you can explain that to him. Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for coming out and spending your evening with us. It's a great honor to be here. And would you just please join me in thanking Franco and his lovely wife, Dana, for putting this on. All right. Of course, you know why we're all here tonight. I just want to begin with a timeline so that we all can start on the same page. And if you can see, in 1998, in February, that's when the talks began of Sandusky's retirement with Joe Paterno. Then, about a couple months later, is when the 1998 investigation was reported by a mother of victim. Now we know him as victim 6. About a month later, after authorities thoroughly reviewed and investigated, they decided there was no wrongdoing. About 3 years later, in February, that's when the Mike McQueary incident, where he saw Sandusky in the shower with a boy. And then in November of 2008, Aaron Fisher came forward. We now know him as victim number 1. He came forward and started the investigation. About 5 months later, in the spring of 2009, the Attorney General's office got this case and began the investigation. And who was the Attorney General back in 2009? Tom Corbett, your governor. Okay, so he begins the investigation, and 3 months later, he discovers the 1998 investigation. Well, that's 2 victims right there. He has the 98 victim, plus, actually, that was 2 boys that were investigated with Jerry in the shower, and then he had victim number 1, so that's 3. If he would have investigated it then, the mother would have found several more victims for him, but he didn't. So fast forward about a year and a half, and they come upon Mike McQueary's incident. And then, of course, things start rolling. Mike McQueary testifies, Joe, Tim Curley. Of course, November of 2011 is when the grand jury presentment was leaked. November is when Jerry was arrested. And then, of course, Curley and Schultz were charged. And then November 9, 2011 is when the Board of Trustees fired Joe Paterno. I'm sorry, I misspoke. They retired him 3 weeks early. Then Sandusky was found guilty last June. The Freeh Report came out about a month later. And then a couple weeks after that, the NCAA sanctions came down. Okay, so Freeh was retained to conduct an independent, full, and complete investigation. Well, you all had a handout. It's 5 sheets stapled together. You can look at that on your own time, but those are 3 investigations that Freeh performed and conducted, and one of those was for Wynn Resorts, one was for FIFA, and one was for Penn State. All 3 of them show that Freeh's client, who hired him, was hired to investigate their particular individual, and it's amazing that they got the results they wanted after they hired Freeh. So every report that came forth from Freeh was what their client wanted. And so I just want to ask Franco a question. Where is he? If you need a predetermined report, who are you going to call? Louis Freeh, that's right. All right. So was it full, complete, and independent? Well, only 3 witnesses out of 19 were investigated, or were interviewed. And the most important evidence that Freeh says were the emails, and they were 3 very vague emails. In fact, Freeh says that he analyzed over 3.5 million documents. Well, if you do the math, over 8 months, that comes out to 2,000 documents an hour, 8 hours a day, 7 days a week for 8 months straight. Remarkable. The engagement letter that recently came out couple months ago shows the contract between Freeh and Penn State, the Penn State Board of Trustees. And you can see in that contract, he says he will perform an investigation and will provide a report that will contain the failures that occurred, the cause of those failures, who had the knowledge, and how those allegations were handled. He doesn't say the report will contain if any failures happened, if there were any causes, and who, if any, knew about it. So you can see it was very predetermined from the beginning. Another interesting fact is that Freeh was hired to do this investigation to determine those elements 1 through 4 above that we just talked about. However, the Board of Trustees already had a firm in place to handle the Sandusky matter, and as you know, the state of Pennsylvania had already charged Tim Curley and Gary Schultz, and so the criminal investigation was beginning. They were handling it in the judicial system, and so why would Penn State spend millions of extra dollars on a second law firm when what they wanted to know was being handled by Pennsylvania? Freeh had no subpoena power, and even trustee Ken Frazier from the Board of Trustees task force, who hired Freeh, admitted that he would not be able to interview any of the key witnesses and that he had no legal authority on the pending criminal matters. And again, there were only 3 witnesses interviewed and only 3 very vague emails. That's not full or complete. Was it independent? Well, Freeh was representing the Board of Trustees. His team was under the sole direction of the task force. In the engagement letter, it says the 2 parties would consult one another during the investigation, and that Freeh's team was looking forward to working with the task force. That sounds like a mutual working relationship that isn't independent. Again, the criminality of the Penn State officials and Penn State's culpability was being handled by the state of Pennsylvania. So you have to ask, what was the motivation to pay millions of dollars for this unsubstantiated report? Was it to justify the firing of Paterno and Spanier? The board meeting back in March, Freeh actually answers those questions, but I'm just going to go through these slides a little quicker. And these slides are actually online that you can find and go through them at your leisure. Oh, by the way, Penn State indemnified Freeh. So in that contract, Freeh was indemnified. So if there were any lawsuits, if there was any amount of money that would have to go toward his defense, if there were any settlements, guess who'd pick up the tab? Penn State. Many of you remember this report, this statement from Freeh when he came out in July 12, 2012. Our most saddening and sobering finding was the total disregard and safety for the children and the welfare of the victims, and that the 4 top men at Penn State, Graham Spanier, Tim Curley, Gary Schultz, and Joe Paterno, failed to take any steps for 14 years to protect the children, and that they repeatedly concealed information. I'm going to go through a couple findings that Freeh had in his report regarding the '98 investigation, and we're going to look at it in view of the Pennsylvania state law. And this law deals with who you're allowed to tell about child abuse investigations. And that law says that Paterno, Spanier, nor Curley were authorized to know. And so when you look at these findings, and I'm just going to go through them quickly, Freeh says that these men were kept informed of the investigation. Well, number one, the law says they were not allowed to be informed of the details. And when you get to his strongest piece of evidence was a very vague email that was from Tim Curley, the athletic director, to Gary Schultz, that said, the subject matter was Paterno, and it said, I touched base with the coach, keep us posted. Freeh alleges that coach is Paterno. That's a fine assessment, but what details are disclosed in touch base? And again, the law says that they were not allowed to know. Again, there was a second follow-up email from Curley. It said, anything new in this department, coach is anxious to know. The subject matter of this email was Jerry. So he was probably speaking about Jerry. And of course, Sandusky would be the one who would be anxious. He was being investigated. And again, assuming it was Paterno, there are still not exact details from that one sentence about what Joe knew or what Tim Curley knew. And again, the law prohibited them from knowing the details. Okay, so they were not kept informed of the investigation. And then finding number 2, despite their knowledge of the criminal investigation, well, again, they didn't have knowledge. They did not know it was a criminal investigation. And I'll just go through these slides quickly. This is Exhibit 2D in the Freeh Report. And the email on the left was the email that was sent from Police Chief Harmon, who was the head of the University Park Police Department, to Gary Schultz. And you can see when Gary forwarded that email to Tim Curley to give the update of that investigation, he took out what is in red. And so he filtered it based on the law. And so that's why they would not know the details of what was going on in '98. And again, Spanier and Schultz were not allowed to tell the Board of Trustees. Okay, and then the fourth point was Sandusky was convicted of some incidents that occurred after '98. Well, he says, had they prohibited Sandusky from bringing children to the university, that maybe these would have been prevented. Well, they didn't know that they needed to prohibit him from the facilities. He was still an employee at that time, remember, and so there would be no reason for them to prohibit him because they didn't know the details, and in fact, if they did, they know that the law found no wrongdoing with Jerry in '98. All right, so, oops. Again, if they knew everything and were kept informed, there's one thing that Freeh did find out that Jerry Lauro from the Department of Public Welfare and Detective Schreffler from the University Park Police at the end sat down with Jerry and told him not to shower with boys anymore. They did not give that information to Joe or Tim or Graham, and they did not tell him to monitor him. So if they knew everything, why didn't they know that? And why wouldn't they have been told to monitor Jerry? So another thing, if you think about it, the majority of the people in the Lash building were 18 years old and older. The majority of the people at Second Mile were 16 years or younger. And so why would the focus be on Penn State? Why wouldn't it have been on the Second Mile where these boys came from and where Sandusky would find these boys? This should have been a red flag to CYS. CYS is the Center County Children and Youth Services, and DPW is the Department of Public Welfare. These are the agencies in charge of the children with Second Mile and also with the children who in the care of the Sanduskys, the foster children and his adopted children came through these agencies. So the red flag, even if they found no wrongdoing in '98, they should have been the ones who had been monitoring Jerry. And so did these agencies fail? Was it incompetence? Well, Freeh says there was a cover-up. If there was a cover-up, it was the local authorities and not Penn State. I'd like to talk a little bit about Jerry's retirement and what that tells us. Freeh found no evidence that linked his retirement to the fact that Tim and Joe knew that he was a child molester. Now that just seems unreasonable. If they knew he was a molester, now remember, they started talking about retirement in February of '98. So if they knew he was a child molester, now a couple months later in June, his retirement would have been post-haste. He would have been done that summer. They would not have allowed him to stay around if they were trying to cover it up. So when you look at the retirement, it actually proves from their behavior and the whole details of the retirement that they did not know. But let's assume they did know. So starting in June or May of 98, they knew, of course, they're going to have no respect for this man. They're going to have no tolerance and no concern for him. And they would have wanted to get rid of Jerry as quickly as possible. And Joe would have jumped at the chance to speed up that retirement that summer of 98. And they would have never agreed with Penn State, who gave him privileges, unlimited privileges, after he retired for the football, in the football facilities. However, this is exactly what took place. Joe actually told Sandusky that he could continue to coach under him as long as he was head coach. That's not distancing himself. That's not speeding up retirement. In fact, after 98, where Freeh supposedly says that they knew about Jerry being a molester, that you would think that he actually coached 2 more seasons. So he still coached in 98 fall and then the fall of 99. So he didn't actually retire until June of 99, but then was rehired for an emergency hire that fall. So again, that would tell you that they did not know, giving him extra seasons to coach. Another interesting fact is that in May of 99, right before the retirement was final, Jerry wrote a letter discussing and demanding things that he wanted. So he wanted to have an ongoing relationship with Penn State. He wanted Second Mile to continue to have visibility at Penn State. He wanted to be actively involved in the outreach program. He wanted to continue to work with young children. He also wanted to continue to run football camps on the campuses. How would a man who is a child molester negotiate with the people who know he's a molester for his retirement? What would he have to hold over them? If you don't do this for me, I'm going to tell everyone I'm a molester and that you're covering it up for me? It makes no sense. He would have no negotiating power if they knew he was a molester. Let's see. Sorry about that. So, again, Joe had offered him to stay on as coach as long as he was coaching. In fact, right after he retired, Paterno praised him, saying that Sandusky was a person of great character and integrity. In 2001, Gary Schultz praised Sandusky for his work at the Second Mile. And in May, in 2010, Curley wrote a letter of recommendation for Sandusky for an Outstanding Achievement Award. After Jerry's retirement for almost 10 years, he ran football camps at 3 different campuses. And one of those campuses was University Park. So for 10 years, he was around kids running these camps. In fact, he also used football staff and some of the players to help him out with his golf outings. So do these actions represent the men, that these men had knowledge that he was a molester since 98? One final thought about that. You would think if they were covering this up for over a decade, that when they learned they were going to be subpoenaed in 2011, that there would have been a rash of emails and phone calls, getting together, making sure they got on the same page, getting their story straight. Well, Freeh found no emails out of the ordinary during that time period, late 2010 and early 2011. In fact, the Attorney General subpoenaed the men's home phones, office phones, and cell phones and found nothing out of the ordinary. And by the way, if they knew that Jerry was a molester and they were covering it up and it's about to come out and be exposed, don't you think they would have gotten competent counsel who specialize in criminal matters and not relied upon Cynthia Baldwin? Okay, the next thing I want to talk about quickly is a 2001 grand jury presentment in the Mike McQuarrie shower incident that he witnessed. And you all got a handout, this brochure. I'm going to go through this quickly, but everything is in here. You can see the diagram of the showers. Thank you to Ray Blehar for those. And you can take these home with you and look these over. If you open the last panel and hold it like this, you can just see that Mike McQuarrie's testimony goes with the 3 figures to the left. And then the bottom testimony is Dr. Dranoff, and that goes with the figure, the bottom figure. But again, you can look at these at your leisure. Of course, mentioning the grand jury presentment, we know that the grand jury presentment said that Mike McQuarrie witnessed Jerry Sandusky and a boy in the shower, and the boy was being subjected to anal intercourse by Sandusky. We know now that after the hearings on cross-examination, and also, this is at the Curley and Schultz hearing, and also at the Sandusky trial, that Mike McQuarrie did not witness a sexual assault that night. There were 10 men who knew directly or indirectly about this incident. Mike McQuarrie, the eyewitness, who went home and told his father, John, that night, and also their friend, Dr. Dranoff. He then told Joe Paterno the next day, and then he spoke with Tim Curley and Gary Schultz. Those two told Graham Spanier, and then Tim told Jack Rakovitz, the CEO of Second Mile, and then he told 2 of his board members. They decided it was a non-incident and did not take it any further. So in all, 10 men were aware. I'm just going to go through these. Again, you can go through these on your own. There's discrepancies. On the very back panel are a list of discrepancies between what Mike said at the grand jury presentment and also between what he told the detectives and the investigators, and then also on his cross-examination. If you look at the behavior of all those 10 men, they all had the same behavior. They all acted similarly. And that is, not one of them called the police. Not even Mike McQuarrie, who witnessed the act. He went home and told his father, John, and Dr. Dranoff. Dr. Dranoff is a mandated reporter. It is mandatory that he would report this if there was a crime. He asked Mike 3 times what he saw. He was trying to determine whether a crime was committed or not, and Mike McQuarrie kept going back to the sounds. None of them called the police. They were all concerned with his behavior, and they passed it on to the person they thought would best be able to handle it. Now remember, we're in 2001. Jerry Sandusky is no longer an employee of Penn State. Okay, he works full-time with the Second Mile. Again, like I said, Dr. Dranoff asked him 3 times, what did you see? He could not answer him with visual. He just went back to the sounds. Dr. Dranoff did not report it. He did not call the police. That means he did not believe a crime was committed. Since all of their actions were the same, that would indicate that a crime hadn't been committed and there was not a sexual assault. But the Attorney General obviously falsified McQuarrie's account, and we just have to ask why. Why was this account embellished? Another question I have, if all 10 men did the same thing and didn't report it, why are only the Penn State men, Tim Curley, the athletic director, Gary Schultz, vice president of business and finance, and Graham Spanier, former president, why are they being charged with crimes and the other 7 aren't? It just doesn't add up that those 3, especially with Dr. Dranoff and John McQuarrie, they had the first account from that night, and they did not call the police. Oops. Okay, so was there a cover-up? Was there an effort to conceal? We look at his retirement, and we'd say no. And based on their behavior over the past 14 months, no, there was no cover-up. Everyone involved kept telling someone else and bringing other people in who they thought would best be able to handle it. There was no cover-up. There's no effort to conceal. In fact, Mike McQuarrie testifies that he was never told by anyone, not Joe, not Tim Curley, not Gary Schultz, not to tell anyone. Of course, Freeh says they covered it up for bad publicity. At this point, Jerry Sandusky was not an employee of Penn State, and so the bad publicity would be with Second Mile, not Penn State. Freeh gives, free pass to Jack Rakovitz of the Second Mile, Jerry Lauro from the Department of Public Welfare. He gives a pass to CYS. Even the janitors who didn't report it because they were scared they'd be fired, so he gives them a free pass. And also John McQuarrie and Dr. Dranoff. All right, real quickly, I just want to discuss a little bit about the sanctions. As you know, they came down because of the Freeh Report. This is a letter, there's a letter from Mark Emmert that he wrote to Penn State, the Board of Trustees, And in that letter, he says that they will investigate and they will examine Penn State's exercise of institutional control. They were going to do an investigation. He also said that they will not interfere with an ongoing federal or state investigation that were going on, of course, with Curley and Gary Schultz. He said, we respect that under our criminal justice system that there's a defined process to determine the facts and also criminal guilt or innocence. That's called due process. And then he also said, we will utilize this information in our review. If the Board of Trustees would have just held Mark Emmert and the NCAA to this letter, we would be right now still waiting, playing football. Nothing would have happened last year. There would have been no sanctions yet. They would have done their own investigation, and they would have waited for the trials to take place. Of course, Emmert got the power to take corrective and punitive action right away from the Freeh Report because the Board of Trustees officially accepted it. And he said that another investigation would be redundant. And you just have to ask, why did he go back on it and not wait until the trials to determine criminality, whether they were innocent or guilty, and whether Penn State was culpable? One point. When Erickson is asked why he signed the consent decree, well, of course, he says he was threatened with the death penalty. But his first statement, he says, is if Penn State did not agree to the sanctions, a formal investigation would have begun. I think that's the threat that gave Erickson pause, not the multi-year death penalty. Because if they would have done another investigation, they would have exposed the Freeh Report for its fraudulent and baseless conclusions. The Board of Trustees would no longer be able to justify their termination of Paterno and Spanier, and they would have had to wait for the completion of the trials of Curley and Schultz. And if he did sign this, as he said, because of the threat, then why aren't they fighting the sanctions? Why isn't Erickson and the Board of Trustees fighting the sanctions, saying that it was signed under duress? And one final slide I just want to talk about. Mark Emmert, as you know, a story came out recently and talked about the problems that he leaves behind when he goes from one job to another. Well, in fact, they called him out on it. When he was at LSU, they said, well, you had your football team was cheating. And his quote is that the facts speak for themselves. We went from an athletic program that was underperforming dramatically to one that was performing well. Well, when you put the numbers together and you do the chart, Mark Emmert was there from 99 to 04, and as you can see, the first 3 years, LSU graduated less than 40% of their football players. Penn State graduated around 75%. The cheating was exposed, and then he says they went from underperforming to performing well. Well, the 3 years after, they're right around 45%. They did improve a little. Penn State went up almost to 80% consistently. So here you have Mark Emmert, the head of the NCAA, who is saying that he believes graduating less than half of your football student athletes can be defined. Yeah. I know, that's right, exactly. They're not very good cheaters. Good point, Franco. So he says graduating less than half of your football student athletes is performing well. Yet, Penn State, who consistently graduates 75 to 80%, has a football cultural problem. Well, I'm concluding now, and that's my presentation. And I just want to say that the facts, the evidence, or the lack of evidence speaks for itself, and there was no cover-up. And the conclusion that these men had disregard for these children and for 14 years covered it up and did nothing about it is not true at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Isn't she great? Tell you what. She really breaks it down for you. Yes, she does. Hey, I just want to mention that she was going over the NCAA and with Mark Emmert and Rodney Erickson. Unfortunately, we don't have the slides here today, but I do have a presentation that I do show that that in November and December of 2011, Rodney Erickson made certain statements about certain things. And then in July of 2012, all those things that Rodney said were in the NCAA decree. And so it does make you think about, were some things by design, where Rodney Erickson had certain things that he wanted in the decree, and they put it in there. All the things that he said, less emphasis on football, and integrity, want to monitor, all that sort of stuff. So, sorry I don't have that slide today, but it's a very impactful slide. Next, how was the Sandusky abuse case handled? I tell you what, all you have to do is ask Ray Blehar. That's it. With this guy, that's all you have to ask, and he takes it from there. Ray is a 2008 MBA honors graduate of the Penn State Smeal College of Business. Ray has 27 years as an analyst and investigator. Currently, he is a senior requirements analyst for the U.S. government. Ladies and gentlemen, Ray Blehar.
Good evening. Actually, your program's wrong. I had an anniversary in February. It's 28 years as an analyst and investigator. And really, what could keep you going for 28 years doing that kind of work? Well, it's very interesting work. Part of what we do deals with psychology and the study of cognitive ability. Everybody here okay? And one of the things in evaluating evidence, which is what we do, is to evaluate bias, all right, to make sure that when you do an analysis, unlike Freeh's reports, that these things are fair and objective and complete. And so one of the biases that we look at is something called an anchoring bias, which means once you get a thought in your head or you believe something, like somebody believes there was WMD in Iraq, okay, they can't move off that topic, or they're glued to it. This is a good example of anchoring. You have a picture of Jerry Sandusky on the right, and then you have a picture of Tim Curley and Gary Schultz on the left. And so that photograph is a way to anchor you to a belief that Jerry Sandusky's crimes are tied to the people at Penn State. And this is something that the Attorney General was very successful in doing, and Louis Freeh was very successful in doing. I'm trying to, where's the advance here? Okay, here we go. So how do you anchor a false narrative? Well, first, you write something in the grand jury presentment about seeing a naked boy being abused by Jerry Sandusky. Then you have the governor saying, remember that little boy in the shower. And then that pretty much seals that little kids are being abused. And then Louis Freeh comes around about 8 months later, and he says the rapes of these boys occurred in the Lash building. So again, tying rapes to Penn State, and then tying this, saying this is a cover-up. So that was pretty much how the scandal got anchored in everybody's minds, particularly in the media. So let's talk about the crimes. Well, when the grand jury presentment came out, there were 8 victims and there were 40 counts. Later on in November, 10 more counts were added. And then the Freeh Report said Jerry Sandusky was found guilty of 45 of 48 counts. And because of the way this was presented, again, everybody believes that all these crimes happened on Penn State's campus. But when you look at the trial verdicts, 15 counts on the campus, less than half, okay, specific to Penn State's campus. And the 5 counts for victim 8, the janitor incident, there was possibly an error in admitting that testimony. So those may not even stand through the appeal to the Superior Court. And then there's 30 counts that happened not specific to Penn State property, and then 24 of those definitely off property. So these were not all crimes committed on Penn State's campus, but the public perception is that they were. And so really, Louis Freeh said it was the facilities that was the currency that were allowed Sandusky to abuse children, when in fact it was his access to children. It had nothing to do with his access to the campus. So another thing, another perception. When you looked at the way the grand jury presentment was presented to everybody, you had Aaron Fisher as victim 1, who was abused, and they said Central Mountain High School had responded appropriately. And then they put victim 2 up there, the victim that was abused in the shower, and McQuarrie witnessed that crime. And then they said 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 all happened. And then victim 8, the janitor. And so had Penn State, the way it looks up there, had Penn State intervened, we could have stopped all this abuse. But when you really put the crimes in chronological order, you see that the victim 2 crime happened pretty much after almost all of the other crimes had been committed. So Penn State's intervention with victim 2 would not have stopped the majority of the crimes. And there were also 2 other victims. So when you add those victims, again, you have most of the crimes occurring before the 2001 incident, an apparent stop of abuse for 3 to 4 years, and then Aaron Fisher being abused. And so now what's the perception? Okay, well, you have this stop of abuse. Why did that happen? Why couldn't the police find any victims for those years? Well, the bottom line is that the police didn't find any victims for 3 years. That's right. For this case, the police did not find a single victim during this 3-year investigation. And that's quite a story. And it's probably a story that the Attorney General wouldn't want anybody to know. Okay, let's try this. Okay, so how did the investigation go? Why couldn't we find any victims? Well, first of all, why couldn't the police? Well, you had really 3 victims, victims 1, victims 9, and 10, who were pretty much called in on their own. Victim 6's mother was contacted by Sarah Ganem, and then she pointed out 4 other victims. So with that 1 victim, you got 5 victims. And then victims 2 and 8 have officially not been identified. So that's who identified the victims. But what did the police have to say about how these victims were found? Well, first the investigator said, anyone who sat through that trial knows it was a thorough investigation. Yeah, one that couldn't find anybody for 3 years was thorough. No holding back. They're not getting any breaks, okay, but they're working hard, not finding victims. And it was all kept very secretive, and people wanted to maintain a secret. So that's what the investigators said. So let's look a mini timeline. My timeline of this investigation is probably 4 pages long. But really what Eileen pointed out and what I'll point you to is June 2009 when they learned of the Sandusky investigation from '98. It took them 19 months after learning about that to actually retrieve the police report from the Penn State campus. And you also see up there at the top that all along they've been telling Aaron Fisher that there were other victims here, but none of these victims ever show up at the trial. So somebody was keeping a secret, and really, who was it? So the Attorney General, when Agent Sassano took the stand at the trial, he started to talk about how they discovered leads in the case and how it led them to the victims. So, victim 3, they said they found him by talking to another victim. He was interviewed in July 2011, but he was really actually identified by the mother of victim 6 in December. So, he also had several court dockets in the system, meaning he had traffic violations, so had the police just run a background check on him, they could have found those and found his address. And so they didn't follow up on this lead for about 6 months. So it's hard to say that they weren't getting any breaks or really diligently trying to find a victim. Victim 7 is an interesting story. Agent Sassano said that he executed a search warrant in Sandusky's old office on April the 12th of 2011. And then he found a list of campers from Second Mile from 1995, and victim 7 was on that list, and his name had an asterisk next to it, so that stood out to him. Well, the interesting thing is, had Agent Sassano been in Strawberry Square just a day earlier, he could have seen victim 7 testify at the grand jury, because the cops actually had found him in February, and nobody told Sassano. So obviously somebody was keeping a secret. So this list is not at all relevant to them finding victim 7. And again, the media did not pick this up as they went through the trial. Victim 9, another interesting story. So they went to Sandusky's home. Again, they did not get a search warrant for Sandusky's home, I think, until 25 months into the investigation, which is unbelievable for a child molestation investigation. A warrant is one of the first things you should get of the molester's home. Okay. And again, another list found in the house. This list, his name is marked with a dash. His mother's name is written next to his, and the phone number's there. The mother also had a criminal record. She had a DUI, and it was in the system in 2008, which had her address in McClure, Pennsylvania. And they didn't find him either. He had to be called in by his assistant principal in November. So what were these cops doing? And again, this is an obvious one. Victim 9 came out after the presentment in November, and the media did not catch that Sassano was pretty much just lying on the stand when he testified to this. And victim 10 is another interesting story. This is, again, a search warrant in Sandusky's office, and another camper list, his name marked with an asterisk. This kid had a rap sheet a mile long, and he had been in jail for 23 months, left out in July 2009. So they could have found his probation officer who would have led him to his address. And again, he had to call in himself after the November 2011 presentment came out. And the media didn't see this either. So it's amazing what a little investigation will do. And so when you look at the whole timeline, the police didn't find any of these victims. The mother of victim 6, she identified almost all the kids in December. Victim 6 was her son, so they got to him in January because he was home from break at school. Victim 7 was a friend of her son's. They found him the next month. Victim 4 took them 4 months. He had records in the system for traffic violations. Victim 5, we don't know when he was really found. I suspect it was January because he was friends with victim 6's sister. Victim 3, again, several traffic dockets in the system and could have been found, took them 7 months. And then 9 and 10, they had to basically phone it in themselves. So not much of a police investigation. I don't see how Corbett and Kelly are going to be able to talk their way out of this. And again, the media's never really followed up on any of these facts. And so here's another, Agent Sassano is quite the character. So they asked how they set the date for the McQuarrie crime because it changed from 2002 to 2001. And it was supposed to happen on the Friday before spring break. So Sassano says, I went out and I bought 20 TV guides from 2001 and 2002. Okay, well, spring break occurs in March, so he's buying TV guides in February. So it doesn't make any sense. All right. McQuarrie got hired for a coaching job in 2004. And so he didn't buy any TV guides from 2004. One of the things that McQuarrie said was, Joe told me, if you're coming over to talk to me about a job, forget about it. So It doesn't make any sense that he would not have got 2004. Why did he buy 2002? Who knows? But what's interesting is that the emails in Schultz's notes were turned over to the OAG in March 2012. So basically, the Attorney General probably used Schultz's notes to set the date and not TV guides. And again, the media never questioned Sassano's story. Rudy was not over? No, the movie was only halfway done at the time of the incident. I think it started at 7. No, the commercial was a 3.5-hour movie. Mike was a big Notre Dame fan. And anyway, so what can we conclude about this investigation? Well, basically, the investigators weren't trying very hard. They weren't using basic investigative procedures. Now, I don't have records, or I don't have access to the Department of Motor Vehicles. These guys would have all been in the Department of Motor Vehicles and could have been found like that. I found most of them in the court system because troubled youth are going to have a rap sheet, most of them. The TV guide thing's just preposterous. I don't know why anybody would believe it, but they did. And nobody really analyzed this. So when I put out my report, Report 3, I'll pretty much rip this investigation to shreds. The next thing, what did the prosecutors do to anchor this narrative? Well, first, how do you describe the victims? Remember them or understand them as the children they were. Jerry Sandusky was seen with little boys. Victims were weak, little boys, unaware of the nature of the contact. So you pretty much make them out to be weak who were forced into sex acts with Sandusky. So the first victim he puts up is victim 4. He was 13 when he was first abused by Sandusky, and he says, "You were 13. Yeah, I'm a little kid. How high up on the defendant were you?" So McGettigan moves his hand down. When he stops at his waist, victim 4 says, "A little above the belly button." Well, I have photographs of victim 4, and he was about 5'6" when he was 15, and that's the 50th percentile. So above belly button height would be 4 feet tall on Sandusky, which means it's not even on the charts. So he would have had to grow 18 inches in a 2-year period, which is impossible. So again, that's just one of the ways that the prosecutors pursued their case. Now again, in the opening statements, here he is, Prosecutor McGettigan, putting this on Penn State. First of all, he doesn't even mention the state agencies that failed miserably in 1998. He briefly mentions Fishers High School, Central Mountain, but he doesn't really say anything bad about anyone there, even though they tried to discourage the report of Fisher. McGettigan says nobody at Second Mile knew anything, but people at Penn State, he doesn't know, but they could have responded better. So again, to anchor this even further, he puts victim 4 up, who says almost all the abuse took place in the showers and hotels. All of the testimony is about football. Most of the evidence exhibits are about football. And then this kid got all kinds of gifts. Golf equipment, snowboards, you name it, Sandusky gave it to him, and they had like one photo. They just piled this stuff up and took a picture of it, yet there was photo after photo after photo of Penn State football. Let's see, you got a delayed reaction here. Can you advance? Thank you. This chart's interesting because we have the narrative that there were all these little children who were abused at Penn State. But when you look at this chart and their ages, you can see that almost all of the serious crimes like oral sex or anal rape all occurred with youths that were in their teen years. An interesting point, victim 10, he's kind of an outlier. He only has this 1 or 2 contacts with Sandusky where they have touching and oral sex, and then there's nothing again. Victim 6 also is interesting because he has the shower incident in '98, and then he maintains a relationship with Sandusky into his college years. But really, the crux of the chart is that the only known incident of rape occurred off campus. So when you hear Louis Freeh say these boys were raped in the Lash building, it's a completely false statement. The statement that Sandusky was raping children at Penn State is a completely false statement. Yet the media after and even today continues to say this. We'll get an advance, please. Thank you. So really, the prosecutor was very successful at anchoring this narrative. Everybody believed after this happened that little children were abused. It was all Penn State's fault. False. The media, the jurors, they're all convinced of it. But these narratives are false. They're completely not true. Now, how do you break an anchor? Well, there has to be incontrovertible evidence that reveals the narrative is false. And you see the word up there, will. This will be exposed. A different narrative will replace the former narrative. And this is what Kathleen Kane's investigation will do, because she's looking at the same evidence I'm looking at, and she has access to more evidence. But the evidence I have definitely does the top two. My report 3 will preview what Kane's investigation should reveal whenever that comes out, and it'll probably be a long investigation because of all of the webs and the tangledness involved between Second Mile, state government, Penn State. But when it comes out, it will be a shot heard around the world. I thank you, and my investigation will continue.
Thank you, Ray. You know what? We'll take a 10-minute break. Okay, there's grapes, cookies, water, soda upstairs. So we'll take a little break, and then we'll start the second half of the program. We have a great film, and then we'll follow up with the panel discussion, and then a question and answer period with our guests. Okay? Thank you.